When she told me she was pregnant, everything changed. At first I felt scared, but also responsible. She said it was mine. She said she loved me. So why did everything feel off? I started noticing things, strange messages, quiet conversations. When I walked into the room, and one sentence she slipped in her sleep that I'll never forget. It was all a setup, and the truth. The truth destroyed more than just my trust. My name is Derek, and 6 months ago, I thought I had my life figured out. I was 28, working as a software engineer at a tech startup, finally making decent money after years of struggle. That's when I met Cassandra at a friend's birthday party. She was stunning, long auburn hair, green eyes that seemed to light up when she laughed. But it wasn't just her looks. Cassandra had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room. Within an hour of talking, I was completely hooked. We exchanged numbers, and what started as casual texting quickly became something more intense. She'd send me good morning messages, ask about my day, remember small details. I'd mentioned, for someone who had been single for 2 years, this attention felt incredible. 3 weeks into dating Cassandra, she suggested I meet her friends. We went to this upscale bar downtown, and I immediately felt out of place. Her friends, Rachel, Madison, and Troy, all seemed to have money. Designer clothes, expensive watches, talking about vacation homes and luxury cars. I worked hard for my salary, but I wasn't in their league financially. When I mentioned my job, Troy actually smirked and said, "Oh, you're one of those computer guys." Cassandra quickly changed the subject, but I caught something in her expression. Embarrassment, maybe disappointment. That night, she was extra affectionate, almost as if she was compensating for her friend's behavior. "Don't mind them," she whispered. "I like that you're different. You're real." A month into our relationship, I started noticing things that should have been red flags. Cassandra never wanted to split bills. She'd always forget her wallet or suggest places way outside my budget. When I couldn't afford the expensive restaurant she wanted to try, she'd pout and say things like, "I thought you cared about making me happy." She also had this habit of going through my phone. At first, she played it off as being playful, but I caught her scrolling through my messages and checking my social media. When I asked her about it, she'd get defensive. I thought, we were being open with each other. Don't you trust me? The manipulation was subtle but constant. She'd make me feel guilty for working late, jealous when I hung out with my friends, and somehow always positioned herself as the victim in every disagreement. 2 months into dating, Cassandra called me crying. I was at work, in the middle of debugging a critical system error when my phone rang. "Derek, I need to see you, it's important." The tone in her voice made my stomach drop. I left work early and met her at her apartment. She was sitting on her couch, holding what looked like a pregnancy test, tears streaming down her face. "I'm pregnant," she said, barely above a whisper. "It's yours." The world seemed to stop. We'd been careful, or so I thought. But mistakes happen, right? I felt a mix of terror, responsibility, and surprisingly, a small part of excitement. "Maybe this was meant to be. Are you sure?" I asked, sitting down next to her. She nodded, showing me the test. 2 pink lines. Positive. Cassandra transformed overnight. Suddenly, she was researching prenatal vitamins, talking about baby names, and making Pinterest boards for nursery designs. She seemed genuinely excited, and her enthusiasm was infectious. I found myself getting caught up in the fantasy. We'd have a family. I'd be a father. We started looking at bigger apartments, talking about our future together. She'd rest her hand on her still flat stomach and smile at me with such love in her eyes. But there were moments, brief flashes, where something felt off. She never seemed to have typical pregnancy symptoms. No morning sickness, no food aversions, no fatigue. When I mentioned this, she'd say she was one of the lucky ones, or that every pregnancy is different. As weeks passed, the financial requests started. First, it was prenatal vitamins and doctor visits. Then she needed money for maternity clothes, even though she wasn't showing yet. When I suggested she use her own savings, she'd get emotional. "I thought we were in this together," she'd cry. "I'm carrying your child and you're worried about money?" I felt terrible. Here was the woman carrying my baby, and I was being selfish about finances. I started putting money aside, taking on freelance projects to cover the extra expenses. My savings account, which I'd been building for years, began to dwindle. She also started hinting about moving in together. It would be cheaper, she'd say, and I want us to be a real family. The pressure was subtle but constant. Around the 6-week mark of her supposed pregnancy, I started noticing Cassandra's behavior becoming increasingly erratic. She'd receive text messages and immediately turn her phone face down. She'd take calls in another room, speaking in hushed tones. One evening, I walked into her bedroom while she was on the phone. She quickly hung up when she saw me. "Who was that?" I asked casually. "Just Rachel," she said, but her voice was tight. "Girl talk." But I had heard a man's voice on the other end. Deep, definitely not Rachel. The moment that changed everything happened on a Tuesday night. We'd fallen asleep watching a movie on her couch. I woke up around 2 a.m. and was about to wake her to move to the bedroom when she started talking in her sleep. At first, it was just mumbling. But then, clear as day, she said, "Marcus will never find out. The test was Sarah's. He's so stupid." My blood went cold. Marcus? Who was Marcus, and whose test was she talking about? I stayed awake the rest of the night, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of what I'd heard. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe it was just a random dream. But deep down, I knew something was very wrong. The next day, I couldn't concentrate on anything. The name Marcus kept echoing in my head. I started paying closer attention to Cassandra's behavior, and what I saw made my suspicions grow. She was extremely protective of her phone, always keeping it with her, even when she went to the bathroom. She'd receive calls and step outside to answer them. When I asked about doctor's appointments, she'd give vague answers about scheduling conflicts. I decided to do something I never thought I'd do. I looked through her social media when she was in the shower. That's when I found messages between her and someone named Marcus. The conversation was mostly deleted, but I caught fragments. "When are you telling him?" And "This is getting complicated." I knew I had to confront her, but I needed more evidence. The next week, I told her I wanted to come to her next doctor's appointment. Her reaction was immediate and telling. "Oh, you don't need to do that," she said quickly. "It's just a routine checkup, very boring." "I want to be involved," I insisted. "This is my child too." She became agitated, making excuses about appointment times, how the office was strict about partners attending, how she preferred to handle medical things alone. Every excuse made me more suspicious. That's when I made a decision that would change everything. I hired a private investigator. The private investigator, a woman named Janet, was professional and discreet. I felt awful hiring someone to investigate. My girlfriend. But I had to know the truth. Within a week, Janet had uncovered information that made my world crumble. Cassandra was indeed seeing someone else, Marcus Thompson, a real estate developer who was married with 2 kids. They'd been in a relationship for over a year, but the pregnancy revelation was the most devastating. Janet had followed Cassandra to a clinic, not for prenatal care, but to buy a fake pregnancy test from someone who worked there. Apparently, there was a whole black market for fake positive pregnancy tests. The woman I loved, the woman I thought was carrying my child, had been lying about everything. Armed with this information, I confronted Cassandra. I'll never forget the look on her face when I laid out everything I knew. First denial, then anger. Finally, a cold admission of guilt. "You wouldn't have stayed otherwise," she said, as if that justified everything. "You were already pulling away. I could feel it." She was right about one thing. I had been having doubts about our relationship. But to fake a pregnancy? To manipulate me emotionally and financially? "What about Marcus?" I asked. Her face went pale. "How do you know about Marcus?" The truth came spilling out. Marcus was her real target. Wealthy, established, everything she wanted in a partner. But he was married and wouldn't leave his wife. I was her backup plan, her financial safety net, while she waited for Marcus to make a decision. The fake pregnancy was just the beginning. As I dug deeper into our relationship, I realized how thoroughly I'd been manipulated. She'd been using my credit cards without permission, had convinced me to co-sign for her car loan, and had even taken money from my account using information she'd obtained from going through my phone. But the emotional damage was worse than the financial loss. She'd made me believe I was going to be a father. I'd started planning a future, imagining holding my child, teaching them to ride a bike, helping with homework. That fantasy had been built on lies. I also discovered that her friends were in on it. They'd been coaching her on how to maintain the charade, how to ask for money without seeming greedy, how to keep me emotionally invested. I consulted with a lawyer about my options. The financial fraud was clear-cut. She'd stolen money and used my credit fraudulently. But the emotional manipulation, while devastating, wasn't necessarily illegal. I decided to press charges for the financial crimes. It wasn't about the money, it was about accountability. Cassandra had treated people like pawns in her game, and there had to be consequences. The legal process was lengthy and emotionally draining. She tried to contact me multiple times, sometimes angry, sometimes pleading, sometimes threatening. I had to get a restraining order. During the court proceedings, I learned I wasn't her first victim. She'd pulled similar schemes on 2 other men in the past 3 years. One had been emotionally devastated enough to require therapy. Today, 6 months later, I'm still rebuilding my life. The financial damage was significant. I lost about $15,000 and had to repair my credit. But the emotional recovery has been harder. I've been in therapy, learning to trust my instincts again and recognize red flags in relationships. The experience taught me that love shouldn't come with constant financial pressure, emotional manipulation, or isolation from friends and family. Cassandra was sentenced to probation and ordered to pay restitution. Marcus, it turned out, had no idea about her scheme. When his wife found out about the affair, she filed for divorce. Cassandra lost everything she'd been scheming to get. As for me, I'm dating again, slowly and cautiously. I've learned that real love doesn't require fake pregnancies, manipulation, or elaborate deceptions. It's built on honesty, respect, and genuine care for each other's well-being. The scar from this experience will always be with me, but it's also made me stronger and wiser. Sometimes the worst betrayals teach us the most valuable lessons about ourselves and what we truly deserve in a relationship. They say trust is like a mirror. Once it's broken, you can never really look at it the same way again. Cassandra didn't just break my trust. She shattered my faith in my own judgment. But sometimes you have to go through the worst betrayal to learn what real love actually looks like. And that lesson, as painful as it was to learn, might just be worth everything I went through.